Meat, tomatoes, onions, potatoes, fruit, mushrooms. This knife handled all of them, which is strange because most people think this knife shape is only for slicing meat, and honestly, that's exactly what I thought too. But after spending time with the Shibata Koutetsu Chromax Sujihiki, I think the Sujihiki might be the most underrated knife shape in the kitchen. So today, let's find out if this long, lean slicer deserves a place in more home kitchens. The Japanese Sujihiki translates to flesh slicer and is a knife designed primarily for proteins. A long blade, a narrow profile, less drag through food, and typically found anywhere from 240 millimeters to 300 millimeters in length. But if that's all it can do, why am I using it on everything? Most people ignore the shape. You get into Japanese kitchen knives, and 90% of the time when someone asks me for a recommendation, they're looking for a gyuto. Second knife, maybe a peri, a santoku, a bunka, but the Sujihiki often gets skipped because it's viewed as too specialized, a one-trick pony, a knife that only belongs around meat. The funny thing is, after using it extensively, I'm not convinced it's nearly as specialized as people think. And this absolutely incredible Shibata Koutetsu Chromax 240mm Sujihiki is going to help prove it. Meat will actually be the last thing I cut today, but trust me, you won't want to miss that section. And if you know about Shibata-san's famous carrot micro dice, let's just say I may have taken that idea a little further. I expected this knife to be good at proteins. What surprised me was how satisfying it was on just about everything else. Take a cherry tomato. You only need a few centimeters of blade to cut one, but with 240 millimeters of usable edge, you can cut near the tip, in the middle, or at the heel. The excellent bite of this Chromax edge even makes horizontal tomato cuts effortless. The same goes for strawberries. Sure, you could grab an 80mm paring knife, but with a tip this aggressive and precise, you can core a strawberry from 240 millimeters away. Even though this knife is absurdly light for its length, there's still enough weight behind the edge to let it fall through produce with almost no effort. Mushrooms can be squeaky little buggers, but with a thin geometry running through the entire blade, pull cuts feel effortless. Push cuts feel effortless. And that squeaky resistance is reduced because there's simply less blade dragging through the food. Then we have red potatoes, a wet, starchy ingredient that can expose food release issues and wedging almost immediately. Yet, once again, the Sujihiki shines. The shallow blade height creates less drag through the cut, the migaki finish helps reduce sticking, and the overall experience feels almost like cutting air. Some Sujihikis have a drop point style tip. This one features a more aggressive K-tip with the point positioned closer to the edge than the spine. That makes draw cuts through potato skins surprisingly easy. Hopefully by now you can see how versatile a Sujihiki can be. Maybe not a true do-it-all knife, but certainly more capable than most people give it credit for. Need to cut a lime tableside? Just keep the Sujihiki in your hand. No need to stop, clean your knife, and reach for something smaller. Take gailan, for example. A vegetable somewhat like rapini. Long, leafy vegetables like these don't necessarily require height. They do require length. Of course, a 240mm gyuto can do the job, but so can a Sujihiki, and in some cases, that extra reach feels even more natural. Now, let's talk about drag. because it's one of the most overlooked aspects of knife performance. Edge sharpness only affects the first few millimeters of a cut. After that, blade geometry, finish, thickness behind the edge, and blade height determine how the rest of the experience feels. Even a sticky finish, even less than ideal geometry, can be partially mitigated by a shallow blade height. In some ways, this style of knife is more forgiving than people realize. Imagine an extremely sharp edge paired with a sticky finish and a 55mm tall blade while attempting a horizontal onion cut. Good luck. Now, take those same properties and put them on a blade closer to 40mm tall. The knife simply moves through the onion more freely. Less drag, less resistance, a smoother overall experience. And now, for the cucumber. At this point, I'm mostly showing off, so enjoy something completely unnecessary. And of course, I wouldn't do this to you. How does it handle meat? Have a look. Still long enough to cut in a single draw motion. Still long enough to produce ultra-thin slices of flat iron steak. And definitely badass enough for this final boss move. Lime juice down the spine, directly onto the steak. Now, not every sujihiki will perform like this. A lot of what I'm experiencing comes from how well Shibata-san executes the design. The migaki finish helps reduce sticking. The grind is incredibly thin, edge and behind the edge. The geometry is excellent. The weight and balance make a 240mm knife feel surprisingly approachable. And most importantly, this particular knife maintains a very shallow blade height throughout its profile. Not every sujihiki is built this way. Of course, a sujihiki isn't as versatile as a gyuto. If you're someone with large hands, you may find knuckle clearance limiting. And while I've shown plenty of situations where it does excel, there are still tasks where gyuto is the more practical choice. Not everyone will feel comfortable using a long, narrow blade as an everyday knife, and that's completely fair. If you're buying your first Japanese kitchen knife, I'd still recommend the gyuto. But if you already own one and you're looking for something different, I think the sujihiki deserves a lot more attention than it gets. And after spending time with this Shibata Koutetsu Chromax, I genuinely believe it may be one of the most underrated kitchen knives shapes in the kitchen. Shibata-san, thank you as always for being a master innovator and the creator of one of my favorite knife brands of all time. This Sujihiki is currently my favorite knife in your Chromax lineup. And to everyone watching, I'll catch you in the next one. Sujihiki, 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 subliminal messages, Sujihiki.